Weakness does not announce itself as failure. It appears as hesitation, as negotiation with comfort, as the quiet decision to delay what must be done. In ancient Japan, this was understood with unsettling clarity. The samurai did not hunt weakness in the body first. They hunted it in the mind. Bushido was not a code of violence. It was a code of inner posture. A way of standing upright inside uncertainty. To live by Bushido was to accept that fear would arrive every morning, and that discipline would answer it without discussion. Modern minds collapse under excess choice, endless stimulation, and the illusion that motivation should come before action. The samurai assumed the opposite. Action came first. Identity followed. They trained not to feel brave, but to be reliable. Not to eliminate fear, but to make it irrelevant. Weakness was not hated or dramatized. It was observed, stripped of excuses, and starved through daily conduct. This code was never written for comfort. It was written for moments when the mind wants to retreat, soften, or justify surrender. Moments that quietly decide the shape of a life. If weakness has been speaking softly in your thoughts, this is where its voice begins to fade. Chapter 1: The Awakening. The awakening did not come as inspiration. It came as friction. A samurai would wake before dawn, not because he felt ready, but because readiness was irrelevant. The body ached. The mind resisted. Weakness whispered that one more hour of rest would change nothing. Yet he rose anyway. This moment repeated itself daily, and in that repetition, the mind was revealed. Weakness, in Bushido, was never treated as an enemy to be crushed. It was treated as a pattern to be studied. The samurai observed how the mind tried to bargain. How it dressed fear as logic. How it delayed action with reasonable-sounding excuses. This observation was the beginning of awakening. Modern psychology would later name this avoidance behavior. The brain seeks safety, comfort, and energy conservation. The samurai did not argue with this biology. They simply refused to let it lead. They understood that the first battle of the day is not against the world, but against the instinct to remain unchanged. Training was designed to expose the mind at its weakest hours. Cold mornings. Repetitive drills. Silent endurance. Not to create toughness as a performance, but to remove dependency on mood. Over time, the mind learned a new order. Action precedes feeling. Duty precedes preference. This was the awakening. The realization that most suffering is not caused by pain, but by resistance to necessary discomfort. The samurai did not seek hardship for its own sake. They sought clarity. And clarity only arrived when excuses were stripped away. In this state, weakness lost its drama. It became predictable. The same thoughts, the same hesitations, the same urges to delay. Predictability made it manageable. The mind could no longer pretend it was unique or special in its fear. A quiet shift occurred here. Responsibility replaced motivation. The samurai did not ask how they felt. They asked what the moment required. When this shift happens, life begins to narrow in a useful way. Choices reduce. Noise fades. The mind stops scattering energy and starts gathering it. This is where Bushido begins. Not with honor or death, but with the simple decision to stop negotiating with weakness. And once this decision is made often enough, something subtle changes. The mind stops asking for permission. It starts waiting for instruction. Chapter 2: The Ancient Principle. At the center of Bushido stood a principle that modern minds often misunderstand. Acceptance of impermanence. The samurai lived with the daily awareness that life could end without warning. This was not morbid. It was stabilizing. When everything can be lost, clarity sharpens. Petty hesitation loses its grip. Zen teachings shaped this mindset. Thoughts were seen as weather, not commands. Fear could pass through without needing to be obeyed. The mind was trained to sit with discomfort until it dissolved on its own. Neuroscience now confirms this. When the nervous system is exposed to stress without escape, it recalibrates. What once felt unbearable becomes familiar. Bushido used ritual to embody this truth. Sword practice was repetitive and exact. Mistakes were corrected without emotion. The body learned precision under pressure, and the mind followed. This created coherence between intention and action. There was no concept of waiting for confidence. Confidence was a byproduct of repeated exposure. The samurai trusted systems, not emotions. Daily structure became a container strong enough to hold fear without collapsing. A quiet understanding formed here. If death is always near, then delay is the real danger. Weakness thrives in imagined futures. Bushido returned attention to the present act. One strike. One breath. One step forward. This principle dismantled mental weakness by removing its fuel. Overthinking, anticipation, catastrophic imagination, all were cut away by presence. In the middle of this discipline, a subtle invitation appears. To notice how often the mind asks for certainty before moving, and how rarely life provides it. Bushido answered uncertainty with conduct. Not control of outcomes, but control of response. This distinction is essential. Modern stress comes from trying to manage results. The samurai managed themselves. Over time, this produced a mind that did not flinch easily. Not because it was hardened, but because it was aligned. Values were clear. Action followed automatically. Weakness dissolves when the mind stops arguing with reality. Bushido taught that reality does not need agreement. It needs engagement. This ancient principle remains intact. When impermanence is accepted, urgency becomes clean. And when urgency is clean, hesitation has nowhere to hide. Chapter 3: The Internal War. Every discipline eventually reaches the same battlefield. The space between impulse and action. For the samurai, this was known intuitively. The enemy was not outside. It was the moment when the body reacted faster than the vow. When fear surged before reason. When comfort disguised itself as wisdom. Bushido did not deny this conflict. It was built around it. Inside the nervous system, two forces compete. One seeks safety, predictability, and rest. The other seeks growth through exposure, risk, and exertion. Modern science calls this the balance between threat response and executive control. The samurai did not need language for it. They experienced it daily. When a blade is raised against you, the body wants to freeze or flee. Heart rate spikes. Breath shortens. Vision narrows. This is not weakness. It is biology. Weakness begins only when the mind obeys the signal without question. Bushido trained interruption. A pause between stimulus and response. Breath controlled before movement. Posture held before reaction. This pause was everything. Through repeated exposure to controlled danger, the nervous system learned something crucial. Fear does not always require escape. Over time, the alarm softened. The mind gained room to choose. This internal war was not dramatic. It was repetitive and quiet. The same urge to avoid. The same urge to quit early. The same voice that said enough. Training continued anyway. What changed was identity. The samurai stopped seeing themselves as someone who avoids discomfort. They became someone who moves through it. Neuroscience now confirms what Bushido embodied. Identity-based habits override motivation. When behavior is linked to who you are, resistance weakens. The brain conserves energy by acting in alignment with identity. In the middle of this struggle, something subtle emerges. A recognition that the war is not meant to be won once, but fought daily. The samurai did not expect peace inside the mind. They expected order. Fear could speak, but it did not command. Desire could arise, but it did not rule. Weakness thrives when emotions are treated as instructions. Bushido treated them as information. There was no self-hatred here. Only precision. When hesitation appeared, it was acknowledged and overridden by principle. Not aggressively. Calmly. Over time, the internal war reshaped the nervous system. Stress tolerance increased. Focus sharpened. The mind learned that discomfort was survivable. Even useful. This is how weakness dissolves. Not through force, but through familiarity. The unknown becomes known. The feared becomes routine. The samurai did not become fearless. They became predictable under pressure. And predictability under pressure is power. Chapter 4, The System. Bushido was not a philosophy you thought about. It was a system you lived inside. Systems remove debate. They decide in advance what the mind will try to avoid later. This is why the samurai relied on ritual, schedule, and non-negotiable conduct. Every day followed structure. Training at fixed hours. Maintenance of weapons. Study. Silence. The system did not care how one felt. It cared only that the action occurred. This is where modern minds fail. They confuse flexibility with freedom. In reality, too much choice weakens follow-through. Bushido reduced choice deliberately. Rules were simple and narrow. Show up. Complete the practice. Correct the error. Repeat. This repetition did something profound. It shifted discipline from effort to environment. When the body knows what comes next, resistance decreases. The nervous system settles into rhythm. The samurai did not rely on willpower. They relied on inevitability. Modern behavioral science agrees. Habits form faster when friction is removed from the desired action and increased around avoidance. Bushido structured life so that discipline was the path of least resistance. Identity followed structure. Not the other way around. Over time, the practitioner stopped seeing discipline as restriction. It became protection. Protection from indecision. Protection from emotional volatility. Protection from the chaos of an undirected mind. This system also enforced humility. Errors were expected. Correction was immediate. There was no indulgence in self-judgment. Only return to form. This is crucial. Weakness feeds on self-criticism. Bushido starved it by keeping attention on process, not self-image. Each day was complete in itself. No need for grand goals. No obsession with outcome. The system guaranteed progress through accumulation. A sword sharpened daily does not need to be sharpened violently. The same applied to the mind. The samurai understood something rare. Discipline is not intensity. It is continuity. Small acts repeated without emotional charge. Through this system, the mind stopped swinging between extremes. No bursts of motivation. No collapses into apathy. Just steady movement. This steadiness dismantles weakness at the root. Weakness needs chaos, inconsistency, and emotional drama. The system allows none of these. By submitting to structure, the samurai gained freedom from inner negotiation. The mind grew quiet. Energy stopped leaking. And when the mind is quiet and energy is conserved, strength appears without effort. This is the unseen power of Bushido. Not heroics. Not force. Just a life arranged so weakness has no place to sit. Chapter 5, Practice without gaps. Bushido did not demand perfection. It demanded return. This distinction is where most modern discipline collapses. People train intensely for short periods, then disappear at the first disruption. The samurai understood that strength is not built through intensity alone, but through continuity that survives imperfect days. Practice without gaps meant something precise. Never miss twice. Never allow a lapse to become an identity. One failed morning did not mean the code was broken. It meant the next action mattered more. The samurai trained even when training felt dull. Especially then. Dullness was not treated as a problem. It was treated as a phase. The mind always resists repetition because repetition exposes its lack of novelty. But repetition is where reliability is forged. In modern psychology, this is known as habit consolidation. The brain strengthens behaviors that are repeated consistently under stable conditions. Bushido created those conditions deliberately. Same place. Same time. Same movements. Over and over. There was no search for inspiration. Inspiration was considered unstable. The samurai trusted routine because routine outlasts emotion. When injury occurred, practice adjusted but did not disappear. When energy dropped, volume reduced but presence remained. This is the core of practice without gaps. Adaptation without abandonment. Here, a quiet realization often emerges. The mind resists not because the task is hard, but because consistency threatens the ego. Consistency removes the drama of self-image. There is no story. Only action. This is the moment where many quit. Because the practice stops feeding identity and starts shaping it. Bushido anticipated this resistance. That is why humility was embedded into daily conduct. No applause. No recognition. Just the work. Weakness thrives on extremes. Either total commitment or total collapse. Practice without gaps dissolves this false binary. It allows progress to continue through low energy, distraction, and doubt. The nervous system responds powerfully to this approach. Predictable repetition lowers baseline anxiety. The body learns that effort does not always lead to danger. Over time, effort becomes neutral. Even calming. This is how discipline becomes sustainable. Not through force, but through rhythm. In the quiet middle of this process, something important happens. The practitioner stops asking when results will appear. Attention shifts entirely to execution. This shift marks maturity. The samurai did not measure days by achievement. They measured them by adherence. Did I show up? Did I correct what was wrong? Did I leave without excess? When gaps disappear, excuses lose their leverage. Weakness has no opening. Not because it is defeated, but because it is no longer indulged. Practice continues. Calmly. Relentlessly. Without ceremony. This is the backbone of Bushido. Not heroism, but continuity. And continuity, once established, changes the shape of a life. Chapter 6, Environmental Design. The samurai understood something most people never see. The mind does not fail first. The environment does. Weakness rarely appears as a sudden collapse of will. It appears as friction. As clutter. As noise. As easy exits placed too close to temptation. Bushido addressed this not with moral pressure, but with design. The environment was stripped to essentials. Living spaces were simple. Tools had designated places. Time had defined boundaries. Nothing unnecessary competed for attention. This was not aesthetic minimalism. It was psychological strategy. Every object either supported the code or distracted from it. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient insight. Decision fatigue erodes discipline faster than lack of motivation. Each unnecessary choice taxes the nervous system. Bushido removed choice wherever possible. Training occurred in the same locations. Daily rituals followed identical sequences. Even clothing was standardized. Not to erase individuality, but to protect focus. When the environment is stable, the mind conserves energy. Resistance weakens. Action becomes automatic. The samurai also designed distance from weakness. Temptations were not debated. They were placed out of reach. This was not repression. It was respect for human limitation. Bushido assumed the mind would fail under enough pressure. So pressure was managed externally. Silence was used intentionally. Silence reveals internal noise. It exposes urges, impatience, and restlessness. By removing external stimulation, the samurai forced the mind to confront itself. Over time, this confrontation reduced impulsive behavior. The environment became a teacher. Disorder was corrected immediately. Not because disorder was immoral, but because it spread. A neglected corner became a neglected habit. Bushido treated small chaos as an early warning signal. Here, discipline becomes gentle but firm. No anger. No urgency. Just correction. In the middle of this design, a quiet truth appears. If your surroundings constantly demand restraint, they are poorly designed. Bushido did not rely on self-control. It relied on alignment. The same principle applies now. When phones are always visible, attention fractures. When schedules are vague, delay multiplies. When sleep is irregular, discipline erodes. Environmental design is not dramatic. It is subtle and powerful. It shapes behavior without argument. The samurai arranged life so that the correct action was the easiest one to take. This removed the daily battle. The internal war softened because the external battlefield was quiet. Weakness depends on opportunity. Remove opportunity, and weakness starves. This chapter of Bushido is often ignored because it feels unheroic. But it is decisive. A well-designed environment does not inspire strength. It makes strength inevitable. Chapter 7, Transformation. Transformation in Bushido was never announced. It was observed. One day, the samurai noticed something had changed. Fear still arrived, but it no longer disrupted posture. Fatigue appeared, but it did not dictate behavior. Discomfort remained, but it no longer felt personal. This was the new identity. Transformation was not becoming fearless. It was becoming dependable. The mind stopped oscillating between ambition and avoidance. It settled into clarity. Neuroscience describes this as nervous system regulation. The stress response no longer hijacks attention. The prefrontal cortex remains active under pressure. The samurai lived this reality without naming it. Their identity was no longer built on emotion. It was built on conduct. This is the final destruction of weakness. Weakness cannot survive where behavior is no longer negotiated daily. When action is consistent, the mind adapts to match it. The samurai no longer asked who they wanted to be. They asked what the code required. And over time, the answer shaped character. Transformation also brought humility. There was no sense of arrival. No finish line. Only continued practice. The absence of ego made strength quiet. This quiet strength is often misunderstood. It does not seek validation. It does not explain itself. It does not rush. Presence becomes heavier. Words become fewer. Decisions become cleaner. The mind no longer escapes into fantasy or regret. It stays where the body is. This is the final outcome of Bushido. A mind that does not fracture under pressure. A life that does not depend on mood. A discipline that does not require force. Transformation is not visible from the outside at first. But it is unmistakable in moments of stress. When others rush, this mind steadies. When others panic, This mind simplifies. Weakness has not been fought. It has been outgrown. And in this state, a final realization emerges. The code was never about becoming more. It was about removing what was false. What remains is not hardness, but clarity. Not aggression, but steadiness. Not control, but alignment. When you imagine your own moments of hesitation now, which part of you is still negotiating instead of standing? That answer is where transformation quietly begins. Conclusion. Bushido was never meant to be admired from a distance. It was meant to be lived quietly, repeatedly, without witnesses. Its power does not come from ancient swords or dramatic vows, but from how it reorganizes the relationship between mind, body, and action. Weakness, as Bushido reveals, is not a flaw in character. It is a pattern of hesitation reinforced over time. A habit of delay. A reliance on feeling ready. When these patterns are interrupted by structure, continuity, and alignment, weakness does not need to be attacked. It simply loses relevance. What the samurai achieved was not domination of emotion, but freedom from being ruled by it. Fear still arose. Doubt still appeared. Fatigue still visited. None of these were problems. They were expected conditions of being human. The difference was that none of them decided the next action. Modern life multiplies distraction, choice, and stimulation. In such conditions, discipline feels heavy because the environment is misaligned. Bushido offers a different path. Simplify. Reduce. Repeat. Remove negotiation. Let identity follow conduct. This is not a call to intensity. Intensity burns out. This is a call to reliability. To become someone who can be trusted by their own word. Someone whose actions do not swing wildly with mood or circumstance. Strength, in this sense, is not loud. It does not announce itself. It shows up early. It leaves quietly. It corrects errors without drama and returns to practice without resentment. Bushido does not promise happiness. It offers steadiness. And steadiness, over time, produces a life that does not collapse under pressure. The ancient code survives because it addresses something timeless. The human tendency to avoid discomfort and the human capacity to outgrow that avoidance through disciplined living. When the noise fades and excuses lose their grip, what remains is simple and demanding. The question is not whether weakness will appear again. The question is whether you will still give it authority over your next step.